spent some time finalizing the sculpture of my branch, and as you remember, I'm going to be placing the turtle in this small little scene, and I'm pretty happy with the overall results that I've been able to achieve with the high resolution sculpting of my little tree log here as it floats down. As far as the geometry is concerned, this is looking pretty good. In addition, I also spent some time working on crafting a lily pad. Now the lily pad's in its own separate project file. As you can imagine, there's a lot of geometric data in the tree log. It's a pretty high resolution sculpture that contains a lot of points. It was more efficient and faster for me to create the lily pad in its own project file, and now I need to start marrying and importing these two separate projects together. So let's start that process. Let's do a little bit of scene cleanup here. I got some block out stuff that I no longer need, so I'm going to delete that. And let's start looking at how we can craft a small little scene. It's very normal to build assets in their own individual project files and then to bring in, to import, to append inside of Blender those individual project files into a much larger scene one. It actually creates a recyclable element that we can use over and over and over again, and it's a good practice. Before we start, it's really important that we make sure that the bones, the skeleton of our project file are really where we need it to be. I have a high resolution sculpture here and a low resolution retopologized version of the exact same sculpture. It's really important for the baking engine over in Substance Painter to have both of these objects in the exact same location. So if you're working with a high-res sculpture that you intend to bake over in Substance Painter, they need to be in the exact same position as the low-res one. That way it all works the way we want it to work. Substance Painter is going to be taking the location of all the verts on the high res and transferring that to the low res. So they need to be in the exact same location when we export these project files out here in a minute. All right, with that in mind, let's also focus our energy and attention on the tree branch because we need to make sure that this has its own material as well. Each material is going to turn into its own texture set inside of Substance Painter. So I want to have a material for the water, its own texture set, a material for the tree branch, and then a material for the lily pad. And the lily pad is actually going to turn into two separate texture sets, one for the pad and then one for the flower. They're pretty cool models. So let's get that going here real fast. I'm going to go into my branch, into my material library here, and let's just create a new slot. Let's just call this branch. There we go. And that's all we need to do. We just need to go in. I'm going to turn off the high res for a second. We just need to go in and assign all the polygons on the branch to that material. We really don't need to do anything more than that. Take a good hard look here in your outliner. This is pretty cool. I like this about working inside of Blender. It tells us very directly the information that's associated with this object. So the top one, this is the object. This is the data container for the geometry. I used a plugin called RetopofLow to do all my retopologizing right here in Blender, which is great, by the way. And then down here, this last one is the icon and the representation that this object and this data container contain a material. And that's a really great visualization. It's kind of a good double check to validate that a material has been applied to this object. Because as a reminder, all of this is going to get condensed into one FBX file, and the materials are then going to be responsible for creating a series of texture sets over in Substance Painter. All right, let's append in my lily pad here. And let me just go back. I'm in the project file that I want to use. It's this one right here. And let's load in the object called lilypadlow. There we go. And it's way too big. Here it is. Looks good though. It's a cool little flower and a lily pad model that I made. As you can see though, it is gigantic. So let's go in and start scaling this guy down so that it matches the scene scale that I'm looking for. And bear with me just for 1 second here. I'm going to, excuse me. Hit the period key on the number pad. There we go. All right. I'm going to look at my scene from the top just so I can quickly place and rotate this object where I desire it to be. I may actually put it on the front side as well. In my imagination, when I was going through the blocking out of this, yeah, this was kind of the view that I had in mind. This is the composition, if you will. I'm going to go and change my viewport properties so the camera is linked to the view. Yeah, in my imagination, when I was blocking out the composition in my mind, it was something like this. So I may want to put the lily pad in the foreground because I think it's just going to generally get blocked. The turtle's going to be right here, so we may see it in the background. So maybe I'll have one in the background, one in the foreground. That way I'm guaranteed to see it. Let me just grab it, put it in the background. And I'm not going to duplicate it yet. That's going to come here in a minute. And I may even duplicate it once we get back into Blender at the conclusion of our sculpting stage. Let's just get this generally on the water. And we'll rotate this around just to very quickly get it looking like it's just chilling on the surface a little bit. Yeah, something like that. You know, after you guys go home, I may flush out and, well, let's just make this a little bit bigger. The water's a little too small. It's kind of hanging off the edge a little bit. It doesn't suspend disbelief. Let's make it just a teeny tiny little bit bigger. Yeah, that's better. Now it's not hanging out as much, and I can see all portions of it. Let's just grab the lily pad. I fear as though it may be in the water still. So let's drag it up. Yeah, there we go. I'm okay with it being in the water. It should naturally be in the water, but I don't want it to be completely underneath it. Okay. Yeah, so now if this is generally the view of my render in my mind, there's going to be a gigantic turtle here, and maybe in the background you'll see a lovely little flower as well. I'm going to duplicate it and put another one over there. But I'll do that after I do all the texturing. Now let's make sure that everything has a texture before we go any further. Or excuse me, a material, I misspoke. We know that the branch has a material. Let's make sure that the materials for my lily pad have come in, and it looks like they have. This particular mesh object has two. A material for the lily pad itself, and then another one for the flower. I've UV'd all of this stuff. We're good to go as well. This sphere, this is the water. Let's be a good steward and rename this object water and ensure it has its own material as well. And right now, it does not. So let's go ahead and create a new material. Go into a material library, hit the little plus sign, create a new slot. We'll call this one water. This one's not going to get a tremendous amount of information on it, which is just fine. We'll go into edit mode, make sure that all the polygons for the water mesh are selected, and then in my material library, I'll assign it to that guy one more time. And I like to do that just to make sure that all of those materials have been assigned to their right spot and to the right person inside the scene. Okay. The last thing that we need to do before we can export this geometry out over into Substance Painter is make sure that all of our transforms have been applied. We've been moving and scaling a lot of objects around in our scene. At times, Substance Painter can interpret those transforms incorrectly, and things may show up in the wrong area. So I'm just going to double check everything. I got my water selected, and this is such a great example. The water object selected. Look at all the transformations that I've done to this object. So with it selected, I'll go up to the Object pull-down menu, Apply, and we'll do All Transforms, which is going to zero out the position and rotation values and put the scale to 1, which is just fine. I need to do the same thing for the lily pad because, as you remembered, I both moved, rotated, and scaled it. So let's apply all those transformations. And now we're good. Let's triple check the branch. We're good to go on that one. I also want to make sure that the branch the high resolution sculpture for the branch has 0 transforms as well. That way, when I export all this stuff together, this information is going to sync up because we need the high res to be in the exact same position as the low res. All right. So there's my little scene. I'm pretty happy with that. For the texturing of all this is a good place to go. I may put some more lily pads around my water at the end of this thing, but generally speaking, this is looking pretty good. So now comes the fun part. We're going to grab all the objects that I'm going to export. So the branch low, the lily pad low, and the water. And now we'll do File, Export. And of course, we're going to choose the FBX file format from the list. There it is. Now, inside the property boxes, make sure that the Selected Objects option is turned on because we will only want to export the 3 that we've just selected. I'm simply going to put this right here on my desktop, and I only want the mesh objects to be exported. I don't want the cameras and all the other stuff. I just want the mesh. And I'm going to triple check to make sure that the Y channel is up and -Z is forward. This is going to get it out of the Blender specific orientation of the XYZ axis and get it into an orientation that Substance Painter is really going to enjoy. I'm also going to turn off bake animation, and I'll leave the file name as is. Let's export it. It should go pretty fast, and then there we go. We've exported our scene, and we're ready for importing over into Substance Painter so we can start the texturing of our little scene.